In the morning restaurant, he found the leftover food that others had eaten. Elias, who hadn't eaten for days, quickly sat down and stuffed the leftovers into his mouth. Seeing the woman across from him tasting the food with a knife and fork, he imitated her by using a fork to pick up fries and put them in his mouth. However, the waiter not far away noticed him and immediately knew he wasn't a customer, so he harshly ordered him to leave the restaurant. But Elias pointed to his stomach and tried to convince him in his terrible French.
J'ai faim.
Upon hearing this, the waiter looked around and then pushed the leftover food next to him in front of Elias. Then he stood in front of the table, guarding him like a bodyguard. The customers at the other table raised their hands to signal for the bill, but the waiter just nodded and let others to go to the checkout. Elias quickly finished the leftovers, even drinking all the water in the cup without wasting a drop. He then knelt at the street corner begging, watching as coin after coin was dropped into the bowl. He couldn't help but smile. But suddenly, someone rushed over and kicked his bowl away. Looking at the Paris where even begging required territorial division, he began to regret his decision to sneak into France. Several days ago, Elias and his friends set sail towards France on a fishing boat filled with dreams and aspirations. Upon seeing the countless stowaways below deck, he was greatly surprised. Then he pulled his friend aside and took out a dictionary, starting to learn French. If they wanted to find a decent job in France, they had to learn basic communication with the locals in French. One evening, as the two were studying, they were interrupted by a sudden bell ringing. Seeing the crew taking down the canvas, they looked around in confusion only to witness the human smugglers driving away in a speedboat. Elias felt that something was wrong and immediately took off his shoes, put down the dictionary, and jumped into the sea in front of the astonished onlookers. Just then, a patrol boat appeared suddenly, heading towards them. Seeing this, his friend hesitated no longer and also jumped into the water, but the huge waves quickly separated them. As the patrol boat docked in front of the group of stowaways, fearing capture, he could only stop looking for his friend and swim away by himself. When Elias woke up, he found himself unexpectedly drifting to a luxurious club beach. Upon seeing the police patrolling not far away on the sea, he cleverly pretended to be a worker in the club. Although he was planning to sneak out of the club in disguise, Elias was caught midway by a staff member. He had him lift a suitcase on the ground and then took him to the entrance to help the guests with their belongings. Noticing a large group of police outside the club, Elias was not sure if they were coming for him. In fear, he managed to hide in the luggage rack of a tour bus, trying to escape in this way. Unfortunately, the bus driver caught him, forcing him to sit on the sightseeing bus and return to the club. After finishing all the work, Elias seized the opportunity to dash into a thicket of trees but failed to notice the barbed wire on the wall, tearing a large hole in his clothing as he struggled to get out. To avoid arousing suspicion at the club, he sneaked to a place to steal another piece of clothing, but he was caught by a guest inside the room. The guest complained about why he came so late and dragged Elias into the room. Worried about being caught, he followed the guest into the restroom. Facing a toilet filled with sewage, he didn't know what to do. With the constant urging of the people behind him, he reluctantly rolled up his sleeves and reached into the toilet. To everyone's astonishment, he pulled out a wig blocking the drain. The guest was surprised by what he did and gave him a €20 tip. As he left, he didn't forget to steal the clothes left on a bench and changed out of his work attire in the bushes, even managing to sneak in a quick nap. When he woke up again, he found the club entrance surrounded by guests and police. Confused, he tried to blend in and find an opportunity to slip away, but a guest suddenly asked what to do if they caught a stowaway. Upon hearing this, the manager quickly approached the crowd with the questioner, and they walked up to Elias. The manager then let go of Elias, urging him to try this on him. Just as Elias was at a loss, a guest suddenly grabbed the manager from behind, diverting everyone's attention away from Elias. That night, the club staffs, together with the police and customers, conducted a thorough search, and to their surprise, they actually discovered a stowaway hidden there. When Elias arrived at the scene, he found out that the captured person was his friend. The two locked eyes in the crowd, but neither of them stepped forward to identify the other. It was only when the authorities came to take his friend away that his friend suddenly stood up and spoke in his influent French.
Avez-vous du pain frais? Monsieur Boulanger. J'ai pas du pain frais. Venez tout à l'heure.
Their shared dream was to open a bakery in France, but reality gave a harsh slap to them at that moment. Fearing and feeling guilty, Elias once again retreated into the thicket of trees. The next morning, he was awakened by footsteps and cautiously peered out to see police still patrolling outside the club, clearly suspecting the presence of more stowaways. With no way to escape, he could only continue staying at the club pretending to be a guest. However, his thoughts were soon altered by the sudden appearance of a magician. The magician called Elias over and, with astonishing skill, pulled out a fresh flower from his waist. Before Elias could understand what was happening, the magician reached into his clothing and dragged out a live dove before the stunned onlookers. Elias, who had never experienced magic before, was amazed. It was his first time he had a genuine smile in a foreign land. That night, Elias, acting as the magician's assistant, participated in a grand magic show. The audience erupted in thunderous applause, and Elias felt a joy he had never known before. Unbeknownst to him, the manager sitting in the audience had begun to suspect his identity. Suddenly, a rainstorm interrupted the performance, sending the audience scurrying back to their rooms, and the magician began to pack up his props to leave. Before departing, he told Elias,
Si tu viens à Paris, viens me voir au Lido.
When he was thinking how to go to Paris, a woman suddenly approached him and started a conversation. With nowhere else to go, he ended up staying a night in the woman's room. The next morning, the two of them even wandered around the club like a couple. When they had just reached the seaside, they saw several policemen was taking photos. As they approached, they realized that the storm from the previous night had blown two escaping stowaways onto the shore. This scene made Elias feel like he was seeing his future self. He returned to the room, collapsed on the woman's lap. With his influent French, he told her his identity. Upon learning that Elias was a stowaway, the woman didn't report him to the police but instead carefully protected him. Fearing discovery by the club staffs, she even went to the restaurant alone to bring him some food back to the room. However, these peaceful days didn't last long. The club manager soon went into their room and confronted them. Despite the manager repeatedly saying that Elias was a stowaway, the woman still insisted that Elias was her boyfriend. As the woman fiercely protected him, the manager gave them 2 more days to spend together. By then, Elias would be deported back to his country along with other stowaways. That night, Elias, unwilling to accept his fate, secretly opened a drawer while the woman was asleep, intending to take some cash and run. To his surprise, the woman had already packed the money into an envelope for him. Deeply moved by the woman, Elias took off his ring and placed it in the drawer as a gift of gratitude. Before sunrise, Elias stole a sailboat, but lacking the knowledge of sailing, he could only drift aimlessly with the waves. After what felt like an eternity, Elias finally approached a stretch of land. He grabbed onto a nearby speedboat with all his strength and managed to climb ashore using his hands and feet. He then spent $10 to buy a pair of sneakers from a street vendor and headed towards Paris with the vendor's guidance. Before long, Elias flagged down a car on the highway and expressed his desire to hitch a ride to Paris with the driver. However, the driver informed him that Paris was far away and if Elias wanted a ride, he would have to share the fuel expenses. Catching the gist of it, Elias promptly took out €80 in cash. To his surprise, the driver snatched the envelope, emptied all the money, returned the €80 to Elias, and stuffed the rest into his own pocket. He then invited Elias to sit in the front seat, but as Elias circled around the front of the car, the driver suddenly hit the gas pedal and abandoned him. For the first time, Elias experienced the treachery of human nature in the foreign land. Luckily, before long, he encountered a kind-hearted woman who invited him to sit in the back seat and drove a tractor towards a small town. Elias repaid the woman by working diligently, which sparked a different thought in the woman's mind. That day, she gave Elias a sum of money, ostensibly as payment for his afternoon work, but in reality to persuade Elias to stay here forever. Realizing this, Elias knew that it was not suitable for him to linger in that place, so he quietly departed that night while the woman was asleep.